Here to talk a little bit more about supporting local and small businesses, please welcome Danielle Helzer, owner and operator of Rooted Books and Gifts, LLC.
Hey everyone, good morning. Thanks to Open Sky for putting this on and for inviting me. I'm going to give you a little bit, just a quick background of who I am and how I came into small business. I spent my first 10 years as in my adult life as an educator. I taught secondary English and post-secondary English. After that, I wanted to move more into this advocacy policy sector, so I moved into nonprofit. I spent 8 years in different nonprofits, and it quickly wore me down. 8 years feels like a long time. I know some of you have hung in for much longer, so thank you. After those 8 years, I really decided to look around my community and think about what else could I do, to support our community. And it was clear that we were really living in a literacy desert. We talk about a grocery desert, but we were really living in a literacy desert in Grand Island as well. Our community, even though it's, pushing 50,000, has not had a bookstore in its community for 10 years. Before that, those were all corporate chain bookstores. The last independently owned bookstore, from what I know and from what I've heard from like Grand Island lore, is that the last indie bookstore closed in the 1970s in Grand Island. So it's a long time to go without, a small independent bookstore. Independent bookstores are really beautiful third spaces, right? They can be these places of community gathering and community connection. So I was tasked today to really think about what are some of these key challenges facing the small business community. I meet with small businesses all the time and talk with, my colleagues who run their own small businesses, and this is what they've told me. So the number one problem is that the state has several resources available for people who want to open a small business or people who own a small business and need some sort of existing support. But those systems, those resources are very difficult to find, and they require a systems literacy. And quite often, we have people that don't have a systems literacy running businesses. So if they don't know where to look, because I was so well connected into my community through nonprofit and education, I could easily find resources. But not every business owner has that literacy. The other big, I think this is like number one, top on my list. The other issue, the other concern is that financial resources are lacking. If somebody wants to open a small business, if a small business owner falls on hard times, where do they go for support? Where do they get help, right? It's a really hard question to answer. Because there's not a lot out there right now. You can take out lots of loans, sure, right? But any sort of, grant dollars or assistance from the state is lacking. And then the last two things that business owners mentioned to me is rising rent costs and rapidly rising inflation on goods. So you can imagine, right? I talked with a restaurant owner. He's Latino, and he owns a Mexican restaurant. They ship in food from Mexico. The prices have gotten higher for them, right? They've doubled what they normally did like 2 years ago. So that price they pass on to the consumer. And then what happens? Consumers step back, right? And then all of a sudden you have like a pivotal business in the community that's been there, a staple on 4th Street, that's been there for 10, 15 years, is at risk of closing. And when we think about what are the kinds of communities we want to live in, Senator Spivey mentioned we think about culture too, right? Do we want communities filled with big box stores and huge corporations? The last issue, and this was really a concern when I talked with, I don't know if any of you are familiar with Grand Island, but we have this beautiful community in Grand Island called 4th Street, and it's primarily an immigrant-owned business district. That hub, if you're ever on 4th Street, you can tell like there's music playing, there's people walking down the streets, there's markets on the corners. It really feels like you're in a different country because there's people from all over the world speaking different languages. Lately, 4th Street has not been that populated, and I bet you can imagine why, right? There is a real fear in our community of people being picked up and deported and disappeared. And so that impacts, we pass that on, right? That impacts small businesses. All right, so then what are some ideas for policy solutions? Well, in terms of addressing the lack of resources, the first thing I would suggest is to create a statewide small business commission that's made up of actual small business owners. So rather than a federal small business commission, a statewide that's made up of small business owners from across the state, from across lived experiences, from across backgrounds, and those people could come together to, number one, create some sort of business resource hub. The Urban League of Nebraska has a really great hub for Omaha, but we don't have a great hub for the state. And so that commission could create that. That commission could also be advisors to legislators. They could be advisors to the Department of Economic Development. The next sort of solution, when we think about the second issue, was in the financial resources, right? So I was really struck with, in the first panel on health, Dr. Peter Smith mentioned that one way leaders and elected officials on the local level can address health issues is to invest in local communities, right? Invest in local businesses, invest in local grocery stores. This is a huge, opportunity here. Now, the state, a couple of years ago, and I can't remember what LB it was, sorry, but that's not my job. They offered something called the Nebraska Small Business Assistance Act. And then I was a recipient of some of the funds from the Nebraska Small Business Assistance Act. Those funds, I was awarded $20,000 to open my business. Without those funds, I would not have been able to open my business. Our business has been open for a year. We have already donated thousands of dollars to our community. We supply books to schools at a much lower rate than what they can get anywhere else because we have direct contacts with publishers. Our businesses invest in our community, and we need our state to invest in small businesses as well. So I would encourage, senators and legislators and policymakers to continue the Nebraska Small Business Assistance Act, to ask, how that act impacted recipients who were able to open businesses with those funds. And then in terms of addressing rising costs of goods, and inflation, and in terms of addressing immigration, those may seem like, pie in the sky things that our local leaders don't have any impact on, but we do, okay? And I would encourage our local leaders to work more closely with our federal representatives to help them understand the actual impact that their policies have on our local communities, right? To actually understand what this immigration policy, what this does to our communities and how it negatively impacts them. So in short, I've talked a lot, given some problems, some solutions, but a state's budget is really a moral document, and we get to choose what kind of communities we want to create. Thank you.